The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Maya's wrists, snapping shut with a sound that echoed through the silent $60 million cabin. Outside, the rain hammered against the fuselage of the Gulfstream G700, but inside, the air was freezing for a different reason. Captain Richard Sterling loomed over her, his face twisted in a sneer of absolute authority. "I don't care who you claim to be," he spat, tightening the grip on her shoulder. "Scum like you are a threat to aviation safety. You're lucky I don't throw you out on the tarmac myself." He thought he was protecting the jet. He thought he was in charge. He had no idea that the man walking up the jet bridge at that very moment didn't just rent this plane. He owned the sky Sterling flew in. And Sterling's life was about to crash and burn. The rain at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was relentless, a grey sheet of water that turned the tarmac into a slick, oil-stained mirror. It was the kind of Tuesday afternoon that grounded light aircraft and made seasoned pilots grumpy. Captain Richard Sterling adjusted his tie in the reflection of the FBO's glass doors. He was a man who wore his uniform like a suit of armor, 4 gold stripes on the epaulets, perfectly pressed trousers, and a Breitling Navy timer watch that cost more than most people's cars. At 55, Sterling had flown everything from commercial 747s to private bombardiers. He commanded respect, or at least he demanded it. Today, however, he was on edge. He had been called in last minute to pilot a Gulfstream G700, tail number N800LETMT. It was a charter request from the highest tier of the agency, a black card client. Sterling didn't know the principal passenger's name yet. The manifest was sealed for privacy, a common practice for billionaires and celebrities, but he knew the protocol. Perfection. Silence. Discretion. "Weather is clearing up past 3,000 feet, Captain," his co-pilot, a younger man named Dave Miller, said, looking up from his iPad. "We have a slot in 40 minutes. "Good," Sterling grunted, picking up his flight bag. "Let's get the bird prepped. I want the cabin temperature at exactly 68 degrees and the champagne chilled. Whoever is paying 50 grand for this flight isn't going to wait on us." They walked out onto the wet tarmac, heads ducked against the wind. The Gulfstream G700 was a masterpiece of engineering, a sleek white predator sitting idly in the rain. Sterling felt a surge of pride. This was his domain. He was the master of this vessel. He climbed the air stairs, wiping his feet meticulously on the mat before stepping into the galley. The smell of expensive leather and sanitized air hit him. It was the smell of money. "Chloe!" Sterling barked at the flight attendant who was busy arranging a fruit platter. "Is the catering loaded?" Chloe, a petite woman with infinite patience, nodded. "Yes, Captain. Everything is set. But we have a slight situation." Sterling's eyes narrowed. "What situation?" "A passenger is already on board," she whispered, looking nervously toward the main cabin. "What?" "We're 40 minutes from departure. The principal isn't due for another 20. Sterling's jaw tightened. "Who is it?" "She says she's with the principal party. She boarded about 10 minutes ago while I was checking the cargo hold. The ground crew let her through." Sterling brushed past her, his irritation spiking. A breach of protocol. He hated breaches of protocol. He marched into the main cabin, ready to offer a polite but firm reprimand to some eager personal assistant or secretary who had arrived too early. But when he saw who was sitting in seat 1A, the owner's seat, his polite reprimand died in his throat, replaced by a cold, prejudiced suspicion. It was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 19. She was curled up in the massive cream-colored leather seat, wearing an oversized, slightly faded grey hoodie, baggy sweatpants, and worn-out Converse sneakers. Her hair was wrapped in a silk bonnet, and she had large, noise-cancelling headphones over her ears. She was sketching in a notebook, completely oblivious to the world. She was black. To a man like Richard Sterling, whose worldview was built on rigid stereotypes and old-school biases, she didn't look like a black card passenger. She didn't look like a VIP. She looked in his eyes like a mistake, or worse, a stowaway. Sterling didn't clear his throat. He didn't say, "Excuse me." He stepped forward and tapped the girl hard on the shoulder. Maya jumped, her charcoal pencil skidding across the paper. She pulled her headphones down around her neck, her eyes wide. "Whoa! You scared me." "Feet," Sterling snapped, pointing a manicured finger at her sneakers resting on the ottoman. "Off the leather. Now." Maya blinked, confused by the aggression. She slowly lowered her feet. Sorry, I was just getting comfortable." "Comfortable?" Sterling let out a dry, humorless laugh. He towered over her, using his height to intimidate. "How did you get on this aircraft?" Maya frowned, shifting in her seat. "I walked up the stairs. The guy outside with the orange vest let me in." "I'm sure he did," Sterling said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Probably thought you were part of the cleaning crew. But the cleaning crew is gone. So tell me, miss, what are you doing in the VIP cabin?" "I'm waiting for the rest of my party," Maya said, her voice quiet but steady. She reached for her backpack on the floor. "Don't touch that bag," Sterling barked, his hand instinctively moving to his belt. Maya froze. "I was just getting my phone." "Stand up," Sterling commanded. "Excuse me?" I said, "Stand up. You are trespassing on a private aircraft. This isn't a bus station, and it certainly isn't a place for loitering." Chloe, the flight attendant, rushed into the cabin, looking terrified. "Captain, please, she said she—" "Quiet, Chloe," Sterling snapped without looking back. "I handle security on this vessel. You handle the drinks." He turned his glare back to Maya. "I asked you a question. Who are you with?" Maya stood up. She was tall, but she looked small next to the bulky pilot. She took a breath, trying to channel the patience her father always talked about. "My name is Maya. I'm waiting for my dad. We're flying to London." Sterling looked her up and down. The baggy clothes, the bonnet, the worn sneakers. He didn't see a billionaire's daughter. He saw a stereotype. He saw a hoodlum who had slipped past security fences. "Your dad?" Sterling mocked. "And who is your dad?" "Let me guess, he's the rapper who chartered this flight. Or maybe an athlete." Maya's eyes hardened. "Does it matter?" "It matters." Sterling stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Because I don't believe you. I've been flying private for 20 years. I know what our clientele looks like. And they don't look like you." The air in the cabin grew heavy. Maya felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, not from sadness, but from a burning, hot anger. She had dealt with this look in department stores. She had dealt with it in hotel lobbies. But here, in the one place she was supposed to be safe? "I don't have to prove anything to you," Maya said, her voice shaking slightly. "Check the manifest." "The manifest is sealed," Sterling lied smoothly. He hadn't bothered to unlock the iPad to check the specifics yet. "And until the principal passenger arrives to vouch for you, you are a security risk. You are unauthorized personnel." "I'm not unauthorized. I'm the passenger." Maya raised her voice, frustration boiling over. "Lower your voice," Sterling shouted back. "You are aggressive. You are erratic. And you are a threat to the safety of this flight crew." "I'm sitting in a chair drawing," Maya yelled, throwing her hands up. "That's it." Sterling grabbed his radio from his belt. "Security, this is Captain Sterling on N880MT. I have an intruder on board. Hostile female, requesting immediate assistance." Maya stared at him in disbelief. "Are you crazy? You're calling the police?" I'm removing a threat, Sterling said coldly. I'm calling my dad. Maya reached into her pocket for her phone. Sterling moved faster than she expected. He lunged forward and slapped the phone out of her hand. It skittered across the carpet, sliding under seat 2B. Hey! Maya shouted, shoving him back. Assault! Sterling yelled, his face turning red. You just assaulted a captain of a flight crew. That is a federal offense. I didn't touch you. You hit me. Dave! Sterling roared toward the cockpit. Get back here. Now. Dave, the co-pilot, came running out, eyes wide. Captain, what's going on? She's violent. She attacked me. Help me restrain her. Dave hesitated, looking at the terrified girl in the hoodie. Captain, are you sure? Maybe we should just wait for— That is a direct order, First Officer, Sterling screamed. She is a threat to this aircraft. Restrain her. Sterling reached into his flight bag and pulled out a pair of zip-tie flex cuffs, standard issue for unruly passengers on long-haul flights, though rarely used. Maya backed away, backing into the bulkhead. Don't touch me. I'm telling you. Don't touch me. Turn around. Sterling grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. Ow! You're hurting me! Maya cried out. Stop resisting! Sterling forced her face against the smooth wood of the galley wall. Chloe was crying in the corner, her hands over her mouth. Dave looked sick to his stomach, but was too afraid of his superior to intervene. With a sharp zip, the plastic cuffs tightened around Maya's wrists. Sterling spun her around and shoved her down into the crew jump seat near the door, the seat meant for extra staff, not guests. You sit there, Sterling panted, straightening his tie, though his hair was now mussed. And you don't move. When the authorities get here, you're going to jail. I don't care whose daughter you say you are. Maya sat there, the humiliation burning her skin. Tears streamed down her face now. She couldn't wipe them away because her hands were bound. She looked up at Sterling, her eyes dark and heavy. You made a mistake, she whispered. Sterling scoffed, turning his back on her to check his reflection in the mirror again. The only mistake, sweetheart, was you thinking you could hustle me. Outside, a black limousine pulled up to the side of the jet. The headlights cut through the rain. Sterling looked out the porthole window. Finally, the real passenger is here. Now you'll see how we treat people who actually belong here. He opened the cabin door and lowered the air stairs, putting on his best, subservient smile, ready to greet the billionaire. He had no idea that the storm he had just started was about to wash him away. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, hammering against the aluminum skin of the Gulf Stream like shrapnel. Inside the cabin, the silence was deafening. Maya sat in the jump seat, her wrists burning against the plastic flex cuffs. She had stopped crying. Tears implied weakness, and she refused to give Captain Richard Sterling the satisfaction of seeing her break further. She stared at the bulkhead, her breathing shallow, listening to the pounding of her own heart. Sterling stood by the open cabin door, protected from the elements by the overhang, peering down the air stairs. He adjusted his cufflinks, running a hand through his silver hair to ensure not a strand was out of place. He checked his reflection in the polished wood of the galley again. Perfect. He was the picture of aviation excellence. Dave, Sterling hissed over his shoulder without looking back. Stay in the cockpit. I don't want the client seeing you looking like a frightened rabbit. And Chloe? Champagne. Ready. Now. Chloe, whose hands were shaking as she held the crystal flutes, nodded mute. She glanced at Maya, her eyes filled with apology, but fear kept her silent. She needed this job. She had a mortgage. Crossing Captain Sterling was professional suicide. Down on the wet tarmac, the driver of the black limousine stepped out, snapping open a large black umbrella. He opened the rear door with practiced reverence. A leg stepped out, polished black Oxford shoes. Then, a man emerged. Marcus Thorne was a figure who commanded attention even from a distance. Standing 6'3", he wore a bespoke navy suit that cost more than Sterling's annual salary. He was the founder of Thorne Dynamics, a global logistics and tech conglomerate. He was a man who moved mountains with a phone call. He was black, distinguished, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that were known in the boardroom for dissecting lies before they were fully spoken. Sterling watched him approach and felt a flicker of confusion. He had expected someone different. Maybe an older white industrialist. But Sterling quickly buried his surprise. Money was money, and this man clearly had it. Sterling put on his million-dollar smile, the one he reserved for the people who signed the checks. "Welcome aboard, sir." Sterling projected his voice over the sound of the rain, standing at the top of the stairs like a gatekeeper to heaven. "I'm Captain Sterling. Apologies for the weather, but we'll have you above the clouds in no time." Marcus Thorne didn't smile back. He walked up the stairs with a heavy, purposeful gait. He nodded briefly to Sterling, not stopping to shake hands. His focus was entirely on the interior of the jet. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated with authority. "Thank you for the quick prep. I know this was short notice." "For a client of your stature, nothing is short notice," Sterling said smoothly, closing the heavy cabin door behind Marcus to shut out the storm. The sudden quiet in the pressurized cabin was jarring. "Please allow me to take your coat. Chloe has a glass of Dom Perignon chilled for you." Marcus handed Sterling his wet trench coat without looking at him. His eyes scanned the main cabin, the empty leather seats, the untouched fruit platter. He frowned, a crease appearing between his brows. "Where is she?" Marcus asked. Sterling paused, the coat in his hands. "Sir?" "My daughter," Marcus said, turning to face the pilot. "She texted me 20 minutes ago saying she was already on board. She loves to arrive early to sketch." Sterling's blood ran cold. The smile froze on his face, feeling like a mask that was suddenly too tight. "Daughter?" Sterling's mind raced. He looked at the impeccably dressed billionaire in front of him. Then his mind flashed to the girl in the jump seat behind the galley wall, the girl in the faded hoodie, the bonnet, the worn-out sneakers, the threat. No. Impossible. "Ah," Sterling stammered, his confident veneer cracking. You have a daughter joining us?" The manifest just said, "Thorne Party of 2. I assumed." "Maya," Marcus said, his patience thinning instantly. He stepped past Sterling into the galley hallway. "Maya, you back there, kiddo?" Sterling panicked. He stepped in front of Marcus, blocking the narrow passageway. "Sir, please wait a moment. We had a security incident prior to your arrival." Marcus stopped. He looked down at Sterling, his eyes narrowing. "A security incident? Is my daughter safe? Where is she?" "Well, that's just it, sir," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, trying to salvage the narrative. "We had an intruder, a young woman. Very aggressive, unstable. She breached airport security and boarded the vessel. She claimed to know the owner, but obviously, looking at her, she didn't fit the profile." Marcus stared at him. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. "She didn't fit the profile?" "Exactly." Sterling let out a nervous chuckle, thinking he found common ground. "You know how it is. Hoodlums from the perimeter fence. She was dressed like well, she looked like she came from the streets. I had to take action to secure the aircraft before you arrived. I couldn't risk the safety of the flight." Marcus's face went completely blank. It was a terrifying look. It was the look of a predator deciding how to dismantle its prey. "Captain Sterling," Marcus said, his voice dangerously soft. Describe this intruder to me." "Oh, African-American female, late teens," Sterling listed, sweating now. "Wearing a grey hoodie, sleep bonnet, aggressive demeanor. I have her detained in the forward crew area until the police arrive. I called them 10 minutes ago." Marcus didn't say another word. He shoved Sterling aside. It wasn't a polite nudge. It was a forceful shove that sent the pilot stumbling back against the catering cart. Marcus rounded the corner into the crew area, and then he saw her. Maya was sitting in the cramped jump seat, knees pulled to her chest. Her head was bowed. Her wrists were zip-tied tightly together, the plastic cutting into her skin. She looked up when she saw her father, and her lip trembled. "Daddy," she whispered. The sound of that single word shattered the atmosphere in the cabin. It wasn't just a greeting. It was a plea for salvation. Marcus Thorne froze. His eyes went from his daughter's tear-streaked face to the plastic cuffs binding her hands. He looked at the way she was slumped in the seat, treated like a dangerous animal. A vein in Marcus's temple began to throb. He took a breath, a long, deep inhale, fighting the urge to tear the plane apart with his bare hands. He walked over to her and knelt down, his expensive suit trousers pressing into the carpet. "I'm here, baby. I'm here," Marcus said, his voice breaking. He reached out and touched her face gently. "Are you hurt?" He hurt my arm," Maya sobbed, finally letting the tears fall. "He said I was a threat. He threw my phone. He wouldn't listen to me." Marcus turned his head slowly. He looked back at Sterling, who was standing in the doorway, his face the color of ash. "Captain," Marcus said. The word sounded like a gunshot. "Come here." Sterling walked forward, his legs feeling like lead. The gravity of his mistake was crashing down on him, but his ego was fighting for survival. He was a captain. He had followed protocol. He had to stick to the story. "Sir, Sterling began, his voice trembling. "I had no way of knowing." She refused to identify herself properly. She was trespassing. "She is 19 years old." Marcus stood up, towering over the pilot in the confined space. "She is an art student at NYU. She is wearing a hoodie because she has a 12-hour flight ahead of her. And she is my daughter." "But the bonnet," Sterling blurted out, clinging to his bias like a life raft. "The attire, it didn't look appropriate for a private charter. We have standards." "Standards?" Marcus laughed, a cold, terrifying sound. "You judged her based on standards? You saw a black girl in a hoodie, and you saw a criminal. If she had been a white girl in yoga pants and a messy bun, would you have cuffed her?" Sterling opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The truth was hanging in the air, undeniable and ugly. "Unlock her," Marcus commanded. Sterling fumbled with his belt. I don't have the cutters on me. They're in the flight bag in the cockpit." "Then get them," Marcus roared. "Now!" Sterling scrambled toward the cockpit. Dave, the co-pilot, was already standing there, holding a pair of side cutters. He looked terrified. He handed them to Marcus instantly, bypassing his captain. "I'm so sorry, sir," Dave stammered. I tried to say..." "Quiet," Marcus snapped. He knelt back down. "Hold still, Maya." With surgical precision, Marcus snipped the plastic tie. It snapped open, and Maya gasped, rubbing her wrists. There were deep red indentations where the plastic had dug in. The skin was chafed and raw. Marcus stared at the marks on his daughter's skin. His hands clenched into fists. He stood up and turned to Sterling, who had returned to the galley area. "You put your hands on my child," Marcus said, stepping into Sterling's personal space. "You physically assaulted a passenger." "I detained a security risk," Sterling shouted, trying to regain control. His face was flushing red. I am the captain of this vessel. Under FAA regulations, I have the authority to neutralize any threat to the safety of the flight. She was belligerent. She resisted. She was drawing in a sketchbook, Marcus yelled back, his composure finally snapping. Do not quote regulations to me. I own the leasing company that manages this fleet. I know the regulations better than you do. Sterling stunned. You own... Who do you think pays for the fuel you burn? Marcus hissed. Who pays for that uniform you're wearing? You work for me, Sterling, and you just assaulted the boss's daughter. Sterling's arrogance began to curdle into pure fear. Look, Mr. Thorne, let's be reasonable. It was a misunderstanding, a visual error. I was trying to protect your asset, the jet. You weren't protecting the jet? Maya spoke up from the seat, her voice shaky but gaining strength. She stood up, rubbing her wrist. You were protecting your ego. You wanted to feel big. You told me I didn't belong here. You called me scum. Marcus turned to look at Sterling, his eyes widening. You called her what? Sterling swallowed hard. I may have used strong language in the heat of the moment. She was being difficult. I want you off this plane, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Excuse me. Get off my jet, Marcus said. Get your bag, get your things, and get off. Sir, you can't be serious, Sterling scoffed, a nervous laugh escaping him. We have a slot in 20 minutes. You need a pilot. You can't fly this G700 without a captain. If I leave, you're grounded. Sterling straightened his spine, thinking he had played his trump card. You might be the money, Mr. Thorne, but I am the license. You fire me now, and you miss your meeting in London. And I know for a fact that meeting is worth millions to you. He looked at Marcus with a smug defiance. So, why don't we all just calm down? I'll apologize to the young lady, a formal apology, of course, and we can get in the air. We can discuss compensation later. Marcus looked at Sterling with an expression of absolute pity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. You think you're indispensable, Marcus said quietly. That's your second mistake today. There is no other crew available on this short notice, Sterling insisted. Teterboro is backed up. You need me. Marcus ignored him. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. Operations. This is Thorne, Marcus said. Go ahead, Mr. Thorne. A crisp voice answered instantly. I need an immediate crew replacement for N800I EMT. Captain Richard Sterling is being relieved of duty for cause. Gross misconduct. Assault of a passenger. I want him blacklisted from the agency effective immediately. Copy that, Mr. Thorne, the voice said without hesitation. We have a reserve crew in the lounge. Captain Miller is available, or we can send Captain Davies. Marcus looked at Dave, the co-pilot. Dave, are you typed rated for the left seat? Dave jumped. Yes. Yes, sir. I have my ATP and type rating. I just fly right seat for seniority. Congratulations, Captain Miller, Marcus said into the phone. Miller is taking command. Send me a new first officer. I want wheels up in 45 minutes. Understood. Dispatching now. Marcus hung up and looked at Sterling. The blood had drained from Sterling's face entirely. His leverage was gone. His job was gone. You can't do that, Sterling whispered. I have tenure. I have a union. You assaulted a passenger, Marcus repeated. And not just any passenger. You handcuffed a 19-year-old girl because you didn't like her shoes. You're done, Sterling. You'll never fly a kite in this town again, let alone a Gulf Stream. Just then, blue and red lights flashed against the rain-streaked windows. The sirens wailed, cutting through the noise of the airport. Sterling's eyes lit up. The police! I called them. They'll sort this out. They'll see I was following protocol. He turned and fumbled with the door controls, opening the hatch again. The wind and rain blew in, but Sterling didn't care. He rushed to the top of the stairs. 2 police officers were running up the stairs, hands on their holsters, expecting a hostile threat. "Officers!" Sterling shouted, pointing back into the cabin. "In there, the intruder! And the man with her! He's becoming violent! He threatened me!" The officers pushed past Sterling, entering the cabin. They saw Marcus Thorne standing in his suit, and Maya holding her bruised wrist. "Police!" the lead officer shouted. "Everyone calm down!" "Thank God," Sterling said, stepping back in behind them. "Arrest her and him. He obstructed a federal flight crew member." The lead officer looked at Marcus, then he looked at Maya. Then he looked at Sterling. "Sir," the officer said to Marcus, lowering his hand from his holster. "Mr. Thorne?" "Officer Brady," Marcus said, nodding. He knew the airport detail. He flew out of here twice a week. "Good to see you." "We got a call about a hostile intruder," Officer Brady said, looking confused. "A threat to aviation safety." "The only threat on this plane," Marcus said, pointing a finger at Sterling, "is him." Sterling's jaw dropped. "What? Officer, do your job. That girl." "That girl is his daughter, Richard," Officer Brady said, looking at the pilot with disdain. "We know Mr. Thorne. We know his family." "But she was—" Sterling stammered. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice like ice, "I would like to file charges against Richard Sterling for assault and battery and false imprisonment of a minor." Sterling gasped. "Charges? You can't be serious." "She has visible injuries." Marcus gestured to Maya's wrists. "He handcuffed her without cause. He slapped her phone out of her hand. That is assault." Officer Brady looked at Maya's wrists. He grimaced. He turned to Sterling. "Turn around, Captain," Brady said, pulling his own handcuffs from his belt. "What? No, I'm the pilot!" Sterling screamed as the officer grabbed his arm. "Not anymore," Dave, the new captain, said from the cockpit door. "Get him off my plane." The metal cuffs clicked shut around Sterling's wrists. The sound was identical to the one that had trapped Maya 20 minutes earlier. The irony hung heavy in the air. "This is a mistake!" Sterling yelled as he was spun around. "Do you know who I am? I am a senior captain. You can't arrest me." "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Brady recited, pushing Sterling toward the door. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." As Sterling was frog-marched down the stairs in the pouring rain, soaking his pristine uniform, he looked back up at the cabin. Maya was standing in the doorway, looking down at him. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She just looked tired. Marcus stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "Karma," Marcus whispered, loud enough for Sterling to hear before he was shoved into the back of the squad car. But the nightmare for Richard Sterling was far from over. Because Marcus Thorne wasn't just going to send him to jail. He was going to make sure the world knew exactly what happened on tail number N880MT. The holding cell at the Port Authority police station was a stark contrast to the cockpit of a Gulf Stream. It smelled of bleach and stale coffee, not leather and conditioned air. Captain Richard Sterling sat on the metal bench, still in his rain-soaked uniform, his prestigious 4 gold stripes now looking like a costume from a failed play. He wasn't worried. Not really. He was Richard Sterling. He had 30 years of flying experience. He had contacts. This was just a misunderstanding, a he said, she said situation that his union lawyer would clear up by morning. The girl had been disruptive. He had taken action. It was standard procedure. "Guard!" Sterling called out, his voice echoing in the small block. "My lawyer! Where is he?" The officer at the desk didn't look up. "He's coming, Sterling. Sit down." Sterling paced. He imagined the apology he would demand from Marcus Thorne. He'd sue for wrongful arrest. He'd make sure Thorn Dynamics paid for every minute he spent in this cell. But while Sterling was pacing in a concrete box, the world outside was already judging him. A tarmac worker named Luis, who had been loading a nearby Cessna, had filmed the entire arrest on his phone. He had captured the moment Officer Brady dragged Sterling down the stairs, soaking wet, screaming, "Do you know who I am?" Luis uploaded the video to TikTok with the caption, "Pilot arrested after assaulting Billionaire's daughter." Karen pilot, Jak Justice, Jastos, fired. Within 2 hours, the video had 1.2 million views. By the time Sterling's lawyer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Henderson, arrived at the station, the video was trending on Twitter under Thatchauer's pilot Sterling. "Richard," Henderson said, sitting across from him in the interrogation room. He didn't open his briefcase. He just looked at his client with a grim expression. "Finally," Sterling snapped. "Get me out of here. I want to file a countersuit immediately. That man, Thorn, he abused his power. I was following FAA safety protocols regarding unauthorized passengers." "Richard, shut up," Henderson said quietly. Sterling blinked. "Excuse me? You haven't seen the internet, have you?" Henderson pulled out his phone and slid it across the metal table. Sterling watched the video. He saw himself, red-faced and screaming, looking not like a professional aviator, but like a maniac. He saw the comments scrolling by at lightning speed. "Imagine being that arrogant. Lock him up." "He cuffed a kid for wearing a hoodie." "I used to fly with this guy. He's a nightmare. Glad he's finally caught." This is out of context," Sterling stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "They don't know what happened inside the plane. She was aggressive. She attacked me. It's her word against mine." "No, it isn't," Henderson said, taking the phone back. "That's the other thing. Thorn's legal team just sent over a digital file. It's an audio recording." Sterling froze. "Recording? The girl's phone," Henderson explained. "You slapped it out of her hand, right? Well, it slid under seat 2B, but it didn't stop recording." Henderson pressed play. The tinny but clear sound of the recording filled the small room. "I'm sitting in a chair drawing," Maya's voice cried out. "That's it. Security. This is Captain Sterling. Hostile female. Requesting immediate assistance. I'm calling my dad." The sharp sound of a slap. "Assault! You just assaulted a flight crew. I didn't touch you. You hit me." The recording continued. It captured everything. The sound of the zip ties. The sound of Maya crying. And then, most damning of all, Sterling's voice, dripping with malice. "The only mistake, sweetheart, was you thinking you could hustle me." Henderson stopped the recording. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "It's over, Richard," Henderson said softly. "They have you on assault, filing a false report, and unlawful imprisonment. The FAA is already pulling your medical and your license pending an investigation. The union isn't going to touch this. You're on your own." Sterling slumped back against the metal chair. For the first time, the arrogance evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. The black card world he had served for so long had just cancelled his membership. 3 days later, Richard Sterling was released on bail, but he wasn't free. He was a pariah. Reporters were camped out on the lawn of his immaculate suburban home. He couldn't turn on the TV without seeing his own face. CNN was running a segment on bias in the skies. Fox News was debating the passenger Bill of Rights. Sterling tried to retreat into his den, pouring himself a scotch at 10 a.m. He needed a plan. He needed to fight. He decided to go to the headquarters of Apex Jets, the charter company he had flown for. He would demand they back him up. After all, he had made them millions over the years. He drove to the office, wearing sunglasses and a hat to avoid recognition. He marched into the CEO's office, bypassing the receptionist who tried to stop him. "Grant!" Sterling shouted at the CEO, Grant Miller, who was on the phone. "You need to issue a statement. Support your pilot. This is a witch hunt." Grant Miller slowly lowered the phone. He looked at Sterling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Get out, Richard," Grant said. "What? I've flown for you for 10 years. You know I'm a stickler for rules. I was protecting the asset." "Protecting the asset?" Grant stood up, walking over to the window that overlooked the hangar. "Do you see that empty spot in Hangar 4? That's where the Thorn account used to be. Marcus Thorn just pulled his entire fleet from our management. 5 jets, Richard, 5 Gulfstreams. That's 40% of our revenue gone overnight." Sterling paled. He can't do that. He just did, and he's suing us for negligence for hiring you." Grant threw a file onto his desk. "But that's not the worst part for you. What could be worse? The FAA called this morning. They aren't just suspending you. They are looking into your entire flight history." Grant leaned forward. And guess what they found? Thorn's private investigators dug up 3 other complaints from the last 5 years. Complaints we settled quietly. A flight attendant you grabbed. A ground crew member you called a slur in Miami. It's all coming out, Richard. "Those were resolved," Sterling protested, his voice rising in panic. "Not anymore," Grant said. "You are toxic. You are fired, effective immediately. And don't bother applying to other carriers. Thorn has made sure your name is on the do not hire list of every major aviation insurer in the world. You couldn't get insured to fly a crop duster right now." Sterling backed away, shaking his head. This is unfair. One mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," a voice came from the doorway. Sterling spun around. Marcus Thorn was standing there. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He was calm, which made him terrifying. Beside him was a team of lawyers in sharp suits. "Mr. Thorn," Sterling gasped. "Please, I can apologize. I can make a public statement." "I don't want your apology," Marcus said, walking into the room. He didn't even look at Sterling. He looked at the CEO. "Grant, I see you've delivered the news." "I have, Mr. Thorn," Grant said, looking defeated. Marcus finally turned his eyes to Sterling. They were cold, hard flint. "You took my daughter's dignity," Marcus said softly. "You made her feel small. You made her feel like a criminal in a space where she should have been safe. You thought you had power because you had a uniform and she had a hoodie." Marcus stepped closer. "I promised you karma, Captain. This is it. You are being sued for $10 million in civil damages. My lawyers will take your house. They will take your pension. They will take that Breitling watch off your wrist." "You can't take everything," Sterling whispered, tears of rage and fear welling up. "Watch me," Marcus said. "You'll have plenty of time to think about it. The district attorney is upgrading the charges to felony kidnapping, given that you restrained a minor without cause and prevented her from communicating." Marcus turned his back on Sterling, dismissing him like he was nothing more than a piece of faulty equipment. "Come on, Grant," Marcus said to the CEO. "We have to discuss the liquidation of your assets to cover the lawsuit, unless you want to testify against him." Grant didn't hesitate. "I'll testify. I'll give you everything on him." Sterling stood alone in the center of the office, the walls closing in. He had spent his life looking down on people from 40,000 feet. Now, he was about to hit the ground, and there was no parachute to save him. The courtroom was packed. It wasn't just local press. National media had descended on the Bergen County Courthouse. The case of State versus Sterling had become a lightning rod for conversations about racial profiling, privilege, and abuse of power. Richard Sterling sat at the defense table. He looked years older than he had just months ago. His silver hair was thinning, his suit was a size too big, and the confident sneer that had defined his career was replaced by a nervous twitch in his left eye. He had lost his house. He was living in a rented studio apartment. His wife had left him, unable to bear the public shame and the financial ruin. Maya sat in the front row behind the prosecution, next to her father. She wore a simple blazer and jeans, her head held high. She wasn't the scared girl in the hoodie anymore. She was a survivor who was about to speak her truth. The trial had gone poorly for Sterling from day one. The prosecution played the cell phone recording. They showed the viral video of his arrest. They brought in Chloe, the flight attendant, who wept on the stand as she described Sterling's aggression. "He told me to shut up," Chloe testified, wiping her eyes. "He said he was the security, and I was just there to serve drinks. He seemed happy to hurt her." But the final nail in the coffin came when Sterling himself took the stand. His lawyer had advised against it, but Sterling's ego wouldn't let him stay silent. He believed he could charm the jury, just as he had charmed wealthy clients for decades. "Mr. Sterling," the prosecutor began, pacing in front of the jury box, "you claim you felt threatened by Maya Thorne, a 19-year-old girl sketching in a notebook. Is that correct?" "She was non-compliant," Sterling said, his voice tight. "In the post-9/11 world, pilots cannot take risks. Her attire, her demeanor, it didn't fit the profile of a VVIP passenger." "The profile?" The prosecutor paused, letting the word hang in the air. "And what, exactly, is the profile of a VVIP passenger, Mr. Sterling? Does it require a certain skin color?" "Objection," Sterling's lawyer shouted. "Overruled," the judge said, leaning forward. "Answer the question." "It requires a certain presentation," Sterling stammered, his face reddening. "She looked like she came off the street. I was protecting the owner's property." "The owner," the prosecutor pointed to Marcus Thorne in the gallery, "is sitting right there. And you handcuffed his property, his daughter, because you decided she didn't look rich enough. Isn't that the truth? You saw a black girl in a hoodie and you decided she was a criminal." "I did my job," Sterling shouted, losing his composure. "I am a captain. I demand respect." The outburst sealed his fate. The jury didn't see a protector. They saw a bully. The deliberation took less than 3 hours. When the jury returned, the courtroom fell silent. Sterling stood up, his hands trembling. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Richard Sterling, guilty on all counts," the foreman read. "Guilty of assault in the 3rd degree, guilty of false imprisonment, guilty of filing a false police report." Sterling's legs gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands. It wasn't just a criminal conviction, it was the end of his life as he knew it. The judge looked at Sterling with zero sympathy. "Mr. Sterling, you abused a position of high trust. You used the authority of your uniform to terrorize a young woman based on nothing but your own prejudice. I am sentencing you to 3 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. Furthermore, you are permanently barred from holding an FAA pilot's license." The gavel banged. It sounded like a heavy door slamming shut. As bailiffs moved to handcuff him, real metal cuffs this time, not plastic zip ties, Sterling looked back at the gallery. He locked eyes with Maya. He expected to see anger. He expected to see her laughing at him. But Maya just looked at him with a calm, steady gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just turned to her father, whispered something, and they walked out of the courtroom together, leaving Sterling alone with the consequences of his hate. The sound of a heavy steel door slamming shut has a finality that no cockpit door can match. For Richard Sterling, formerly a senior captain with 30 years of aviation experience, his new world was defined by the color gray. Gray concrete floors, gray painted bars, and the gray jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He was no longer Captain Sterling. To the guards at the minimal security correctional facility in southern New Jersey, he was just inmate 7292. It had been 6 months since the gavel fell. 6 months of waking up to the smell of industrial disinfectant instead of freshly brewed Arabica coffee. 6 months of taking orders from guards who were half his age and didn't care about his flight hours. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Sterling was assigned to the common room for recreational time. He sat in the corner, staring at the small, mounted television that was usually tuned to sports. Today, however, another inmate had flipped it to a national news channel. Sterling wasn't paying attention until he heard a name that made his stomach lurch. Live from Teterboro Airport, where billionaire industrialist Marcus Thorne is announcing a controversial new initiative. Sterling looked up. On the grainy screen, he saw the familiar backdrop of the private hangar. He saw the flashbulbs popping. And there, standing at a podium draped in velvet, was Marcus Thorne. He looked regal, untouchable. Beside him stood Maya, looking radiant in a white dress, a stark contrast to the hoodie she had worn that fateful day. Sterling leaned forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The news anchor continued. Mr. Thorne is launching a $10 million scholarship fund aimed at helping underprivileged minority students attend flight school. But it's the name of the grant that has everyone talking. On the screen, Marcus leaned into the microphone. He didn't look angry. He looked serene. We believe in remembering history, so we do not repeat it, Marcus said, his voice tinny through the prison TV speakers. That is why my daughter and I have decided to name this scholarship after the man who inspired it. We are proud to launch the Richard Sterling Grant for Inclusive Aviation. The common room went silent. Sterling's jaw dropped. We want to ensure, Marcus continued, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, that the name Sterling is no longer associated with exclusion and prejudice, but with opening doors for the very people he tried to keep out. Every young black or brown pilot who graduates under this grant will carry his name as a symbol of progress. The camera panned to Maya. She stepped up to the mic. We are turning hate into fuel, she said simply. A fellow inmate, a burly man who had been following the trial, turned to Sterling and let out a low, rough laugh. Damn, Sterling. They didn't just beat you. They took your name and gave it to the people you hate. That's cold. Sterling stared at the screen, his face burning with a humiliation deeper than prison. His legacy wasn't just destroyed, it was being rewritten. Every time a minority pilot succeeded, it would be under his name, paid for by the man who destroyed him. It was a karma so precise, so poetic, that it felt like a physical blow. He put his head in his hands as the inmates around him laughed at the irony. Miles away, the air at Teterboro Airport was crisp and clean, smelling of rain-washed tarmac and possibility. The press conference had ended. The cameras were packing up. Maya Thorne walked away from the podium, letting out a long breath she felt like she'd been holding for half a year. You okay? Marcus asked, placing a hand on her shoulder. Better than okay, Maya smiled. Did you see the look on the reporters' faces when you announced the name? I did, Marcus chuckled. The best revenge isn't anger, Maya. It's success, and a little bit of rebranding. They walked across the tarmac toward Hangar 4. The old Gulfstream G700, the scene of the crime, was gone. Marcus had sold it. He said it had bad energy. Sitting in its place was a brand-new, gleaming Gulfstream G800, the pinnacle of private aviation. It was sleeker, faster, and more beautiful than its predecessor. But the most striking detail was the tail number painted in gold script, N01MYA. Maya stopped at the bottom of the air stairs. The last time she had stood at the foot of a jet, it was raining, and she was being looked at like she was garbage. "Ready to break it in?" Marcus asked. Maya looked up. Standing at the top of the stairs was the new flight crew. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood tall in her uniform. She was a Latina woman with a sharp, intelligent gaze and a warm smile. Beside her was the first officer, a young black man named David, who looked like he was barely out of flight school, likely one of the first recipients of the Foundation's earlier pilot programs. "Good morning, Ms. Thorne," Captain Rodriguez called down. Her voice was welcoming, devoid of the sneering superiority Sterling had projected. "We have the cabin prepped. Temperature is set to 72, and I believe Chloe has your sketchbook set up on the table." Maya climbed the stairs. Her sneakers, brand new limited edition Jordans this time, gripped the steps firmly. She stepped into the cabin. It was different. Lighter. The dark woods of the old jet had been replaced with cream and gold accents. The air felt lighter too. Chloe was there, holding a tray with a ceramic teapot. "Chamomile and honey," she whispered, winking. "No champagne today." "Thanks, Chloe," Maya said. She walked to seat 1A. She sat down. She waited for the anxiety. She waited for the phantom feeling of plastic cuffs on her wrists, or the sound of a man yelling at her to lower her voice. But the fear didn't come. Instead, she felt the soft hum of the auxiliary power unit. She smelled the leather and the fresh orchids in the vase. She looked out the window as the engines began to whine, building to a powerful roar. "Flight deck to cabin," Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, smooth and professional. "Ms. Thorne, Mr. Thorne, we are cleared for departure to London. Flight time is a brisk 5 hours and 40 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. It's an honor to have you aboard." An honor. Maya opened her sketchbook. On the fresh white page, she picked up her charcoal pencil. The jet began to move. The G800 didn't lumber, it glided. As they turned onto the main runway, Maya felt the thrust push her back into the seat. It was a feeling of raw power. They accelerated. Faster. The hangars blurred. The spot where the police car had parked blurred. The memory of Richard Sterling blurred. With a gentle lift, the wheels left the ground. Maya watched the earth fall away. The airport became a toy set. The fences that kept people out became invisible lines. The cars were just specks. She began to draw. She didn't draw a bird this time. She drew a pair of hands. But they weren't bound by cuffs. They were open, reaching upward, catching the wind. She shaded the wrists, making sure there were no marks, no bruises. Just strength. Marcus reached across the aisle and tapped her arm. He held up his glass of sparkling water. "To the friendly skies," he said softly. Maya tapped her pencil against her chin, looking out at the horizon, where the blue of the ocean met the blue of the sky. She thought about Sterling in his grey cell, watching the world move on without him. She thought about the kids who would learn to fly because of what happened to her. She smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. "To the friendly skies," she replied, "and to the pilot in seat 1A. She turned back to her drawing as the jet punched through a layer of clouds, bursting into the blinding, beautiful sunshine above. She was untouchable now. She was the owner of her own story, and she was finally, truly, flying. And that is how Captain Richard Sterling learned the hardest lesson of his life. Never judge a book by its cover, and never underestimate who might be sitting in seat 1A. He lost his career, his freedom, and his reputation, all because he couldn't see past his own prejudice. Meanwhile, Maya and Marcus turned a nightmare into a dream for hundreds of future pilots. It's a reminder that while hate might make a lot of noise, justice and success speaks the loudest. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice served, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were Marcus? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next video.